Today I'm delighted to hand over facilitation of the discussion to Helene Grover. Welcome, Helene.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Christine
and
Dina. It's lovely to be here.
We have Helene here, Dina here as well. So let me I'm just going to quickly share my screen again. The wonderful world of, so some of you may already be very familiar with Helene from our Writing from Pleasure program. She has devoted her time and energy to it for many, many years, longer than I've been in the library. So thank you, Helene. Helene has both contributed to and nurtured of the many collections of short story books that have been produced as a result of the program, such as A Patchwork of Stories, that was in 2016, Stories from the Street in 2018, and most recently Beachside Stories, which is not actually launched yet, so we hope to do that soon. COVID-19 pretty much everything, so we'll get there. But anyway, thank you, welcome Helene, and thank you for facilitating today's event. And now I'm just going to share just a really quick little piece about Dina, because I know Helene will go into that in greater depth. Welcome, Dina.
Hello.
So let me extend a big welcome and a thank you on behalf of the library. We really appreciate you taking the time to answer all of our Ask the Author questions today. So Dina is a local author, but she's not only local to Randwick, we share her with the Northern Territory. And thanks to the technology that we have today, Dina is in fact joining us from sunny Darwin. So that's why she's looking all glowing and wearing less clothing than we are, freezing here. So Dina has recently published Capriccio, a novel, I hope I'm saying that correctly, based on one of the most notorious love triangles of the 20th century. And it was recently selected as a finalist in the fiction section of the Northern Territory Chief Minister's Book Awards. So congratulations. If we had an audience, I'm sure we'd all be clapping if we could hear them. Thomas Keneally describes it as a fine evocation with barely a false note, and others have said it was scrupulously researched, a wonderful book. It's available, it's a borrow from our library now. Here's a real life copy in the print. And we've also included some purchase links in the email, and we'll include them here in the chat again. So enough from me, over to you, Dina and Helene. And I'm just going to turn off my mic and listen. I'll be back. I'll be interspersing when there's questions.
Oh, good day. Hello, Dina.
Hi, Helene.
Thoroughly enjoyed reading your book. It was an absolute treat. It's a treasure. So before I ask you your first question, which actually I will ask you first, what actually motivated you to this particular story and these characters? What was your first bit that stirred your heart for it?
Well, it was actually a newspaper article, maybe more than 15 years ago. And it was called Haunted by the Ghosts of Love. So that title alone attracted me. And it was a reprint from The Guardian, the London edition of The Guardian. And it was about this woman who had been the mistress of the poet laureate, Ted Hughes, who some of you might have heard of, and how she had been basically written out of history because she just had bad press. And I'm always attracted to stories of injustice. And basically, I then started to read about her and found there was almost nothing written. In all the biographies, in all of the literary criticisms, there was lots and lots about Ted Hughes, lots and lots about Sylvia Plath, but just maybe one paragraph in a whole book about my character, Assia Wevel, who, by the way, in the novel, she is called Esther, not Assia. And here she is. As you can see, she was a stunningly beautiful woman, which was actually to her disadvantage during her life because she was seen mostly as a scarlet woman. or a femme fatale, someone who was a home breaker, who was responsible for the breakup of the marriage of Ted and Sylvia, and even responsible for the death of Sylvia. So she was vilified. And that just raises my hackles. When I see anyone who's been wrongly accused, I've got to speak out. And speak out I have. This is what made me write the book, just to basically correct an injustice and stand up for this woman, like so many women who'd been abused, vilified, and completely wrongly portrayed in the literature of our time. So I hope that's what I've done. I wanted to present Assia, who, as I say, is called Esther in the book, which happens to be her second name, by the way, in real life. But I wanted you to see Esther as a human being with flaws, with faults, yes, as all of us have, but who had been grossly misjudged by society at the time.
Initially, I must ask you this, initially when I did see Esther on the page, I thought, you little homewrecker, you unsatisfied, you've got a very nice husband and you got him in the first place through.
Yes.
And as we went along, it changed. But initially, I did not like her. So,
and that's
credit to your writing, of course.
Thank you. No, that is so, I've heard that quite a lot, and that was intentional. I wanted to show she's a real person. I don't know any real person who's always good and always admirable. And so that is part of my humanising and bringing to life this person. In fiction, of course, you can do so many things that you can't do in a non-fiction book. So I did invent quite a lot of dialogue, put in a few events, made up some characters, but I did want to show her, yes, at first she was like a silly girl. She was mischievous. She was a flirt. But as you read on in the book, you see that this had got her relationship with Ted Hughes, this doomed relationship, had got completely out of hand. It's not what she had intended, not what she'd sought. And yet she got embroiled to the point where she was almost obsessed with this man. And at that stage, it's like an addiction. She became addicted to this very destructive relationship. So I understand that you may not have liked her in the beginning, but I hope you saw that through the development of her character throughout the novel, I have gained understanding, yes.
Mind you, I did notice that he was an incredibly, he is in the book, an incredibly compelling character. He's very strong. I mean, he really came on with it, you know. So I can't imagine any naive, pretty girl not succumbing to it. And so I switched my disdain to him then, because I thought, you horrid man, you know. So you can just, it's the way you coloured your characters that it's just beautiful, really. I mean, I think it takes an author who understands her characters to paint them so clearly and move with them. So that's what you've achieved in this book, I feel.
Oh, I'm really happy to hear you say that, because one of the things, I actually wrote an article about this, is can you enjoy a novel if you don't love the main characters? And of course, both my main characters are, as I said, flawed human beings with many faults. But I wanted to look beneath the surface. Both Ted and Assia in real life have been vilified. Ted's been screamed at by feminists, called a murderer. And in fact, as Helene, as you just said, Helene, he was a very compelling character, and he attracted both men and women to his detriment. He was unable, I think, to cope with the fact that he became famous quite young, and it was perhaps just his nature and human nature to capitalise on that. So
and it's understandable that a naive young girl would succumb to that strong kind of character. But what I find interesting is that the way you wrote him, I mean, it takes a skill to do that. In fact, I wanted to ask you another question on that. When I read the novel, I felt that these pages were masterfully crafted. So how much time did you spend writing this novel and editing it and crafting it to what it became? Because it is beautifully crafted. So what was the time frame? How much of your blood, sweat and tears did you stick in it? You know?
Well, it actually feels like a lifetime, but that would be going back too many years that I could even tell you. As I said, it was around 15 years ago that I first read the article. I didn't start writing straight away. It was kind of germinating. I was thinking about this woman, feeling angry on her behalf. And that led me then to do research. I didn't even know I was going to write a book at that stage, but I wanted to know more about her. Well, when I found so little, I thought somebody's got to write about this woman.
Good.
There was only one book which I'm indebted to, which was a non-fiction book, and it was a straight biography by two Israeli journalists, Eilat Negev and Yehuda Koren. And they wrote a book called Not Haunted by the Ghosts of Love. It's got a title like that, which was what was written on Assia's tombstone.
Oh, right.
And I'm not saying any more about how or when or what happened to Assia, because a lot of you haven't read the book. Whether she lived a long life or a short life, I'm not telling you that either.
You won't give that away. No.
But yeah, so it took me, I'd say, altogether with the inspiration for the idea, the research, and so on. And then I started to write maybe 5 years after when I discovered there was a biography. Again, I thought, well, I won't bother to write about Assia. Someone's done it beautifully. And Eilat and Yehuda became my friends. I communicated.
Oh, lovely.
And they have been so lovely and so supportive. They said, we just wish we'd had the freedom of fiction. Go for it, you know. And so I did, and I sent them a copy, and they loved the book and have written me a lovely review as well. So, but I am so indebted to them, and you know, I've said that in the acknowledgements.
So we have a question from the floor. Sorry to interrupt, and it's related to what you've just been talking about.
Right.
Trevor would like to talk. And where did you find the facts? So I know you've covered that a little bit, but if you wanted to just broaden on how you did the research and how long it took.
Okay. Well, in those days, even 15 years ago, there wasn't a great deal online.
No.
So I went to my city library, which was then the state, New South Wales State Library, went into their archives, got every book I could that mentioned Ted Hughes or Sylvia Plath, hoping I'd find something about Assia in those. And although I didn't find very much, I still got a strong picture of the historical background and the events. There weren't any fiction books that I could find. And then in 2006, it was, the book Lover of Unreason, that was the title of Eilat Negev's and Yehuda Koren's biography, came out. I immediately got a copy. I read it probably from cover to cover in 2 days because I was so fascinated. And that became really almost like my foundation. And those facts have been verified again and again. And because this is fiction, I am allowed to embellish the facts, but I'm not really allowed to depart from them, and I haven't. So everything in that book actually happened. But I've had to invent
and the question was, how long did you, in total, from your initial feeling that this is what you want to write, to put your notes together and your process actually, and how long did you take in total, including all your editing and your agonizing and all the pain that you, I know as an author I understand this, the actual, the agony and the ecstasy in time. How long did that take you? I think quite a lot of our people might want to know that.
Yes, I'm sure those writers out there take courage, because if you think about probably 10 years of writing, rewriting, editing, putting the book away, losing confidence in it, taking it out again, all of that, then sharing the writing process with my wonderful writing groups. I had two writing groups at the time, the Randwick Writers Group, that I was actually convener of that group for about 6 years, and the Waverley Writers Group, and also had some wonderful writers up here where I am now in the Northern Territory, and they all you know, you've got to learn from other writers. If you can't just write in isolation. And so it was the agony and the ecstasy. It's a wonderful way of putting it, Helene.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you too, that there are places there that you wrote in the book, places that, you know, Elisa and Ted, whoever, you know, Larry went to. Did you actually visit those places, or did you research? Because nowadays we can do a lot of stuff on Google. So did you go there? Did you spend time there, or did you spend time in your writing nooks and cafes, of course?
I did. I had the huge good fortune of being able to go to London in 2015. I think there's a slide there too that shows me taking a photograph. I think it'd be about slide number 3 or 4, Christine, if you can see. Yes, there we are. So that is the place in London, Shalco Square, which I've renamed, of course, in the book. And it was just the biggest thrill you can imagine to see the actual place. This is the first location that early in the book we find Grace and Larry, who are the names I've given to Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath, putting an ad in the paper because they were having a baby and they wanted to move out of their tiny, tiny little flat in the city and find a bigger place in the country. So they put an ad in the paper and said, which said, we are looking for someone to sublet. What happened in those days, remember this was the late 50s, early 60s in London, is that you, instead of just being renters, you took out sometimes a 99-year lease. And so if you left, you could get someone else to take over the lease. And lo and behold, the people who came to inspect the flat and who did take the lease were Assia Wevel and her husband, David Wevel. In the book, I've called them Tony, that was David, and Esther. So that was the kernel of the book. And there's another picture there. There I am.
Yes.
2015, you can just see my head, and I'm holding up my iPhone to take a picture of the plaque. In London, there's a whole literary tour you can do, and this property is on the tour. So I'm taking a picture of the plaque, which refers to the fact that Sylvia Plath lived here, because she's become the icon, the feminist icon, the literary icon of our age.
You're actually quite a fan of Sylvia Plath. I remember when we first met, you used to talk a fair bit about her, and I sense that, oh, you know, you're a fan of hers altogether, aren't you?
Well, it's hard not to be when you read her poetry, and most powerful poetry. And I'd highly recommend those who are watching and listening to just get a copy of a very small book. The book that made her famous was called Ariel, Ariel. And just reading those poems, you'll be blown away. So, yes, but I'm not one of the adulators, if you know what I mean. There is a kind of Sylvia Plath groupie club who do things like posting a photo of a lock of her hair on Twitter and so on. And that sort of leaves me cold. I admire her as a writer and an artist. And I wanted to portray her also fairly and without too much, you know, adulation, as a woman who also, like Assia, Esther, had been wrongly treated and just had the most awful experience at the hands of her husband.
Horrible character altogether, wasn't he? I've actually used one of Sylvia Plath's quotes in the beginning of a paragraph in one of my upcoming books, you know. So I have researched her a bit too. She's interesting. You have found a very interesting character. Oh, I can't remember the books in the middle of getting published. I'm done with it, you know.
Yes.
So
I understand.
It was one that sang to me. So she's, and I wonder how many people she sings to, you know.
Oh, so many. I mean, I'll just say a couple of the titles. Lady Lazarus.
Right.
An amazing poem called just Daddy, because Sylvia's father died when she was 8 years old. She never, ever got over that. And that was partly one of the problems in her marriage as well, because she identified Ted, her husband, with her father, Otto.
Oh, right. And what were there any other places that you actually visited that you wrote in the book?
The highlight of my visit to London was being able to visit the British Museum.
Oh, yeah.
And I had to talk my way into the reading room. You had to be a scholar or student or whatever and have some sort of document. So all I had was my passport, and I said, well, I'm an Australian author and I'm writing a book about Ted Hughes, your poet laureate, Britain's poet laureate all through the 80s. And I showed them a little bit of the book, actually, that I was still in the process of writing. And they eventually, I think reluctantly, gave me a reader's card. And I was shown into the hallowed halls of the manuscript room of the British Library in London.
Impressive.
Wow. That was, and still is, one of the highlights of my life. And to be able to see the handwriting and touch the same paper that
yes.
All three characters, actually, I saw documents in their handwriting. I saw that what I'd read in Lover of Unreason was true, that, you know, that these people really suffered, really existed, really went through absolute hell in their lives. And I think what I'd say to our listener today is, please read the poetry, as well as I'd love you to read my book, but the poetry tells the story so beautifully, especially Ted's. We'll get on to Ted's poems, maybe with another question, because I'm going to go on, and Helene won't have time.
Well, I can see that I hear in your voice, in the way you're expressing yourself, how deeply emotionally attached you are to your characters, which is the best way for an author to go, you know, is to make that connection with your characters. See with you all the time. And So on the other side of the spectrum, so there's your joy, the joy of entering your characters, developing them,
Yes.
writing about them and bringing them to the page so other people can get the same sense of them that you've got. And that's where I felt that there's this depth of emotion towards them. So I'd like to know, what were the challenges that you found in writing the book? Because this is the joy part. Now, the challenges and the agonies part. So what were the challenges that you had in, I know some of them you did mention as we talked, but so can you talk about that, your challenges in getting this book together, all of it?
Okay. Well, after I'd finished my first manuscript, which had many, many drafts, and I thought it was finished, I had actually written it using the names of the real people because they were speaking to me and I felt I couldn't change their names. However, I also included little snippets of some of the poetry because, as I've already said, the poetry tells a story better than any and better than I could. So I had just 2 lines before each chapter, and each little quote referred to what was happening in the chapter. And I expected that that would be fine because it really added up to about less than 20 lines of poetry. However, I was advised to seek copyright agreement. Had no problem with that. So I sent the manuscript to Faber and Faber, who are the publishers of both Hughes and Plath. They passed it on to the Hughes estate. The Hughes estate flatly refused to allow not even a syllable of any of their poetry to be quoted in the book. They also insisted that every name should be changed and every place name should be changed. And I was so distressed at getting an answer like that, which took months to get back. And all this time I thought, well, my book's going to be finished, it's done, I just need this little bit of paper. And when that was refused, I actually stopped the whole process, put the book away in the proverbial bottom drawer for several years. I wrote other things. I was really pissed off, as if
Don't blame
you don't
me.
mind me saying that, with that whole refusal.
Did it gnaw at you when you had the book aside? Did it sit there and ignore? Did it want it come out? Did it want to come out from you?
Of course it did, and that is how, in the end, after a few years, I took it out and I thought, okay, if you insist, I'll do what you say. And so I rewrote the entire book because it's not just an easy thing to change a name here and there. You actually have to write a new manuscript, which took me another couple of years. So, you know, that added to the length of the whole process. I then, I actually wrote 3 complete different versions of Capriccio. The first one was the one with the poetry, which is still my favourite. The second one, I thought, okay, I'm going to call this something different. I called it The Haunting of Sylvia Plath because so many people were only interested in Sylvia Plath. So I thought, all right, well, if people want to read the story, I'll tell them it's about Sylvia Plath. And that was a completely different structure. It wasn't chronological. And so then, after I tried to get this right and had given up so many times, I suddenly had this surge of energy, and it was probably because I thought, look, I haven't got time to sit around and wait for people to say, I'll give you permission. And I thought, damn it, I'm going to publish, and publish I did. And that was in only around 2 years ago that my wonderful publisher, who I'll have to give a bit of a plug for, Capriccio, who we share, Helene and I share the same publisher.
They are gorgeous.
And they were wonderful. They did a beautiful job. I mean, I'm thanking them. I love the cover.
Me too.
Evan Shapiro and I together created this cover, and it actually has a meaning. At first, I just had the woman's face. I wanted to find a woman's face with the same green eyes, green-grey eyes that I've described so often.
Yes.
And then I decided I want to cut off her mouth because she's been silenced. She has not been able to speak for herself. I'm going to speak for her. So the eyes are supposed to say, I have a story to tell you, but I have been gagged. Here's my story. Read this book. And so I can't thank Capriccio enough. And I also had a wonderful editor for the final draft, Leone Sperling.
Yes, she's going through the last, yes, yeah, they're great. They're wonderful. It's a wonderful publishing house.
It was a team effort, and I think every book that finally sees the light of day has to be a team effort. You've got the author, but you've got also the editor, very important. You've got the line editor to pick up all the typos, and the developmental editor to make sure that it's flowing. You've got the graphic artist who did the cover, and
the assessment, because the assessment process is also very important.
The assessment process, and finally the distribution and the reviews. This book is also available online on Amazon, Booktopia, Goodreads, and so on. And if you do read it and you do enjoy it, please do put a review online, because that's where most people are getting their books these days.
What you've been saying is really important. We probably have some, budding authors out there, and you've painted a very intense picture of what it takes to get a book, to find what your first passion towards a book is. And perhaps we haven't read anything. Perhaps you would like to read a piece of that? Or just
before you go into reading, there's been a couple of questions come in from the audience. So Judy would like to know how you actually settled on the title.
Oh, I love that question. Thank you, Judy.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell everybody that the reason I called the book Capriccio is that Ted Hughes wrote 20 poems, a series of 20 poems called Capriccio, and they were about his relationship with Assia Weber, or Esther Gutman, as I've called her. And those poems were hidden from the public. In fact, he wrote them soon after his relationship ended with Assia, but they were then put in a very, very expensive book. When I say expensive, in those days, to buy this book called Capriccio with these beautiful illustrations by Leonard Baskin, you would have had to spend 4,000 English pounds, which now, I don't know what that would be now. This book was, I've got an actual picture here of the cover, which was leather. It was leather bound, gold tipped, all of that. And I've just recently been reading, I don't know if you can see this picture, but I'll hold it up. Can everyone see that?
There's a shadow on it.
I might have to call my technical assistant.
There's a red thing with Capriccio on it.
That's right. Now there is just maybe a few copies locked up in the Emory University, one of the places that holds Sylvia's and Ted's work, and now some of Assia's. And that is supposed to be shaped like a coffin, the brown bit in the middle. And you can see the title Capriccio. And so the only way people could read those, the only time people could read those was years and years later, even after Ted Hughes' death, because he did say, I don't want anyone to read these poems while I'm alive. And that's an indication of what the relationship with Assia meant to him, and also his degree of shame. He had a lot of shame regarding what happened in that relationship. And when he published it in a limited edition, very, very expensive, he knew that hardly anyone would read the poems or would be able to afford them, probably maybe sold one or two. Later on, he did hide about 8 of the 20 poems in his selected poems, but they were so well hidden, nobody realised that they were about Assia. So it was only after his death, the posthumous volume called The Collected Poems of Ted Hughes does contain those 20 poems, and I've listed them in this edition, the hardback edition. They're listed, the titles of the poems are listed in the back of the book, because titles are not copyright, and that's why I could use the title Capriccio. This slide shows a recent biography of Ted Hughes. You can see he was a very handsome man, and he and Assia actually looked stunning when they were together, because they're both very, very beautiful people. But this biography by Jonathan Bate was supposed to be a literary study of Ted Hughes's work. However, once again, the Ted Hughes estate, once they got the finished manuscript, withdrew the contract that they had with Professor Bate, who's also written books on Shakespeare, and he's a literary professor. And he was furious, of course, went to another publisher, and in order to get around the Hughes estate, he had to paraphrase, which means not quote the exact poems, but, talk about what they were kind of like. Not the same at all. So that's just to show you what Ted looked like at the time. This was probably
very handsome. I could go for it myself, actually.
Well, you wouldn't.
By the way, Dina, if I may interrupt, I think there was another question in there too. Someone else had a question.
Sure. What was that?
I don't know. I noticed there were 2 questions. I don't know what's happened to them.
Sorry. Just trying to get my buttons going. We have another question from a lady, Torv. How much is true and how much comes from your imagination, particularly as you had to write it a few times? Did you find you changed some of the historical detail with the rewrites?
I love that question too. In fact, I was hoping someone would ask me that. As I've said, the main events are completely true. So the trajectory of the story from their first meeting to, the affair and the children and all of that is true. However, I was able to change a few little minor things to my satisfaction, to help show Assia in a light that was true rather than a vilifying light. So she actually did have 3 husbands before she was with Ted Hughes. So I've cut that down to 2, just to make her less, Scarlet Woman. On the boat, if anyone who has read the book might remember, she actually meets her 3rd husband, David, or in the book Tony, on board a ship crossing the Atlantic, and she's with her, in truth, she's with her 2nd husband, who it is a very dysfunctional marriage, and I show what happens in the interchange between them on that boat. So in the book, he is her 1st husband, not her 2nd husband. That's just a small example. Also, when I talk about Assia's school days, and she was born in Berlin just before the war, and had to escape the Nazis with her family, but when she went to school, there was a lot of anti-Semitism already, even before the war.
Yeah.
What I did with that chapter, there were no details. I couldn't see any details about her school days. So I called on my own experiences, and actually that chapter that is about her first day at school is a replication of my first day at school, not not in Germany during the Second World War, but in rural Australia also at the end of the Second World War, or around then. So I felt that was believable, and I felt, well, I don't know what really happened, but this is what I believe could have happened to Assia when she was 6 or 7 years old. So I invented that completely. I invented the character Rivka, who is like a merging of 2 or 3 different characters, friends of hers in her life. I can't say too much more because I'll be giving you spoilers, but the dialogue is all invented. The letters that they wrote to each other are all my invention.
Before, because we're sort of condensing time, I thought just so that you could tickle a little bit more of the writing, have you chosen a piece that you would like to read?
Well, I'll read just a little introduction to the edition that I've lately written, and it's called Prelude. And I've used musical terms because, as you know, Capriccio is also a musical term.
Of course, of course. Yeah.
So here's my prelude. Who was the real Assia Gutmann-Weber? Was she a temptress, a seducer of husbands, a sensation seeker, or a woman much maligned, hated even, for her unusual beauty, her strange accent, her airs and graces, in short, because of her otherness? In today's age of the Me Too movement, it is unthinkable that a woman who'd been subject to abuse, emotional and social, would be shunned, ignored, and even blamed for the suicide of her rival in love, Sylvia Plath. In the many biographies of Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath, a brief chapter, or sometimes only a paragraph, is devoted to this other woman, evidence in itself of the contempt in which she was held by the literati. Unlike the other famous protagonists in this notorious love triangle, Assia has largely, until now, been written out of history. Only one writer, Australia's poet, Peter Porter, the late Peter Porter, acknowledges that Assia was natural and straightforward, with wit, charm and generosity, never, in my eyes, the femme fatale. And that article was from The Guardian again on the 28th of October 2006. Ted Hughes' sequence of poems about Assia, Capriccio, have inspired this story and given the book its title. Extensive research has contributed to Capriccio, a novel, while it is entirely a work of fiction. So that's not really from the novel, but I wanted really to read that, to put into context and to answer Helene's first question, why did I write the novel?
Why did you write
it? May like to read something from the actual...
Yeah, I've actually picked a little piece here. It's so difficult to pick any one part because it's so beautiful. I've got here, which is, I think, chapter 23, when they're in Cambridge Crescent in London, February 63. Ashen-faced, Larry stared ahead, a look of horror on his face. He was standing slumped against the mantelpiece in the front room of the flat. The room was almost bare except for rush matting on the floor and 2 raffia chairs. Swathes of red velvet material lay abandoned in the corner. The sight of it made him cringe. Grace was going to make curtains from it to heighten up the stark white room. The yellow tape across the doorway of the kitchen was a grim reminder that this was a crime scene. There was a metallic smell coming from the kitchen, which was off limits, while a policewoman and detective completed their inspection. Will I leave it at there?
Yes, I think so, because otherwise we'll be doing spoilers. But thank you. That was a great little passage to read.
Yeah, because that also shows that there's some other criminal thing in there. But what I loved about that is I could see it, the description, the being there. You made it for the reader to be there. And that's what I think was the richness of how you've written it. I mean, there are some rich descriptions in this novel. There are layers and depths of layers, which is what satisfies me as a reader, and that I learned from as an author. I just wanted to ask you one more question, and then perhaps other people can ask you more. What would you like readers to take away from this novel?
Well, I first of all want them to think, I really enjoyed that. I want them to think that was a good read. You know, I want to, as well as informing about the true story, I wanted to entertain people. I wanted them to have a good time, even if, you know, the subject matter might not always be happy. So I made a few notes because that is a hard question. I'm going to have to see.
Yeah. Oh.
Well,
sorry.
This is what I'd like you to take away, those of you there who have read it or who might be going to read it. It's all linked to what I said in the prelude and what I said before. I want people to take away the fact that it's not a good idea to judge a book by its cover. It's not a good idea to judge a person by their appearance, by the way they speak, by the colour of their skin, by the country they come from, by the religion they follow. However we do that, it's human nature. And it's only when you can be pulled up, maybe by a tragedy like we've just had in the Black Deaths matter, that situation has pulled people up and made people see it is criminal to judge people for those superficial qualities. I always liken Assia, in a way, to two Australian women. One is Lindy Chamberlain, who was so badly, I mean, that was a terrible miscarriage of justice. And she was judged simply because she didn't have the right expression on her face.
That's right.
And the fact that
she showed an incredible lack of emotion.
Lack of emotion.
You just made me think. You just made me remember something. I can almost hear that you would be most capable to write Lindy Chamberlain's story, so that might be an idea for your next another novel.
Well,
but I know that you are in the process of writing another novel. Is that so?
Yes, I am. Yes, about halfway through it, which has been hard in the middle of this pandemic and all that's been going on. But going back to Lindy. Was judged by the way she looked, the way she dressed, but mainly by her lack of affect in the courtroom. She didn't satisfy the viewer's picture in their head, their prejudiced picture of what a grieving mother must look like. Yeah. And for that, she paid so heavily, 2 years in prison. Even though she's been exonerated, I've heard people still say, of course that baby wasn't taken by a dingo. You know, the Chinese whispers. This is what what I want to get at is that after people have read this book, perhaps they'll think again before they judge. Yes. Give a moral judgment based on those things. Same with Julia Gillard. She was maligned, I think, mainly because she was a woman and Australia just wasn't ready for a woman Prime Minister, but also because she was a woman who took pride in her appearance, so people took that to mean she was superficial. She had a very strong accent.
I just wanted to jump in there. You seem to have a very strong empathy towards women that have been wrongly done by, from where your perspective comes from. And so in the two characters, in the two female characters of Capriccio, which one would you as an author feel more connected to? Is it Elisa or Esther or Sylvia Plath? Which one made you feel stronger about her?
Oh, definitely Esther or Assia. Because she was not in any way mentally ill herself, whereas Grace, or Sylvia, was mentally ill. She had a diagnosable condition which wasn't diagnosed properly in those days of what we now call bipolar. She actually had 4 previous suicide attempts, and it was just sheer happenstance that she survived those, and it was probably inevitable, you know, that everybody knows. I'm not giving away any spoilers. Everybody knows that Sylvia Plath committed suicide when she was 30, and that is actually one reason for her fame and one reason for her being a feminist icon. Whereas Assia was just an ordinary woman. But she had many talents. She was overlooked. Those talents were totally overlooked because of the fact that she was wicked enough to have an affair. Now, thank you for that slide. Can I just talk about that slide?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I noticed that there's another question and I wanted to see, because we've only got 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So if you can answer that question, talk about the slide and see if there are any more hot pressing questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Well, while we're waiting,
the question. It's not. I can't see it myself, but the question. I think you've answered them already. It was. No, you've actually covered them all. You've covered them all. No more questions from the field just yet. If anyone has any questions, please. You've got 5 minutes to get them in now.
Yes, more questions, please. I love getting questions. And because I could talk about this book for a long, long time, and I have. I hope I haven't talked for too long. But this little slide shows that Assia was a very talented artist. She was a miniaturist, which means she would paint little detailed pictures of plants and animals, designs, and so on. This is something she made it was a birthday card for Ted.
Yes, for Sweet Ted on his birthday. Yes.
Sweet Ted on his birthday, some apples. And she's got an apple tree and a bowl of apples, and the funny picture of the story of who was it? Some scientist who discovered gravity by an apple falling on his head. Anyway, someone can tell me what it was. But it's just to show that she herself was talented, but none of that was ever recognised.
I just made a note to myself to ask you as we went along. I just wrote, just off spec, just to throw you a curve here, Dina, if I may.
Okay, sure.
If you were to meet any of those characters today, what would you say to them?
Oh.
It is a curve, isn't it?
Yeah. I'd say,
or Aisa or Sylvia Plath, which,
Well, I guess if I met my main character, Esther, I'd say thank you for your life, which has, informed me in this book. And then I'd say, and I want to say I am so sorry. I'm so sorry on behalf of the world and on behalf of everyone who's misjudged you and maligned you. I'm so sorry that your life turned out the way it has. And I want to know that I and other people are now learning to value you, not just as the seducer of Ted, which is also wrong, because we all know that Ted was the one that seduced you, and you will find that in the book. So thank you, and please forgive us for what the world has done to you.
Oh, beautiful, Dina. Lovely. Absolutely beautiful. I think we've just, there's one question there before we run out of time. One question. Can't hear you, Christine.
I think you're muted, Christine.
Thank you. Sorry.
You're back. You're back.
I think this was my first rodeo. Oh, by the way, the man with the apple and the arrow pointing out, that's William Tell. He shot the apple off his son's head with an arrow. He was a famous archer.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
I got it wrong.
I know, I was like, I know, but I didn't want to interrupt.
But asking who it was.
So Margie is asking the question, I enjoyed Capriccio and the voice of Asia, I'm not saying any names correctly. Esther was compelling. What is your current writing project? I think you kind of skipped over it when you were...
Oh, well, it's very, very different, completely different to Capriccio. The working title is A Dangerous Daughter. It is loosely based on my own early life. It's a rite of passage story, if you know what I mean. It takes the main character through from childhood to early adulthood. I can't say a lot more about it at this stage, but it is also, like Capriccio, based on the truth. But I have heavily fictionalised it because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and most of the people in the book are still alive. So that was a big challenge.
That's a tricky one, all right. You've got to be careful. And when do you hope to be completed, or is it just fully?
I would hope to have the draft. It's been through many drafts also, but I hope to have it completed by the end of this year, and maybe to see it in print in 2021.
Fantastic.
Well,
we have run out of time, so as it's 5 o'clock here, I'm sure people will be starting to think about whatever they evening dinners and things like that. School pickups. That's me. Well, toddler pickups. So we just like to sincerely thank you. It's a shame we weren't able to have it in person, but we're so pleased that we could do online.